I also want to highlight that, wow, that's a big QR code on this big screen. So you won't miss that. So this QR code points to this slide deck. So I do share some resources on the slide deck, so you don't have to try to memorize that or try to capture the URL. So if you're just pointing to the QR code or that bit.ly URL, you should also have access to this slide deck. Okay. So what we'll cover today is sort of we want to focus a little bit on the data with Google Forms and Sheets, and also visualizing data with Data Wrapper, and then some additional resources and tools that if you wanted to expand on your skill sets, we can provide it as well. I'm focusing specifically with Google Forms and Sheets because A, it's free and it's collaborative. May not necessarily be the safest place to put your data, but it is something that is accessible and easy to use and free to use. I also mentioned Data Wrapper because Data Wrapper is one of the better tools that kind of helps, again, easily visualize your data. Also, they have a free version that ultimately you can use perpetuity. You know, they start charging once you have a little bit more collaborative work that you wanted to do with your team, which is why they justify it by fairly expensive monthly rates. Because they expect the organization to do that. And then we'll share some a little bit more. But before we totally dive into it, I'd love to hear a little bit people's skill sets right now in terms of databases, spreadsheets, or even visualization. What are you doing right now in terms of data and data visualization? What do you use? What tools do you use?
My wife's a little better at this stuff, but I've been using mainly Google Forms, Excel. I'm not totally awful at that, but I don't like it.
I use a lot of Excel, Google Forms. I haven't done much with Data Wrapper, but I really love the bigger data sets. I've been trying to get into some bigger parsing languages, but I'm kind of at a stop with that. But yeah, that's kind of it. I'm very curious about Data Wrapper.
Touch on that for sure.
Well, I mentioned to you my background previous to coming to the newspapers is in nursing, and I love data. And so the pandemic was an interesting time because a reporter and I used Google Sheets, and he would put in each day the number of new cases in Umatilla County of COVID and when deaths occurred. And then I worked with a graphic designer who was working in InDesign to create a visual, a graphic that we published once a week that showed how COVID was surging or waning, and with various points such as, there was a mask mandate here, or the Pendleton Roundup happened here, and look at the big spike of infections and deaths immediately after that. And it was very, very helpful, and I think for the public health department, actually, I think really liked it because it really illustrated what was going on, and that it showed that a lot of the mandates did work, and that having big events was a bad idea.
Super spreaders. You want to add?
Sure. I was a graphic designer before I was a journalist, and so I do a lot of. If someone gives me the data, I can make something pretty. I'm not good at Excel though, and I would like to be better at it because I really like data. And I think data journalism pulls into a lot of what's important in taking stuff that's not accessible, like a giant Excel document of data, and making it accessible to people.
Gotcha. Cool. Excellent. We'll touch a little bit on that. You want to share a little bit of your experience here with data? Nothing. Nothing. How about you? How about this table? What's your experience with data?
I've used Google Sheets using the sort and filter options. I love Data Wrapper, but I haven't used it in 2 years, so I'm happy to have a refresher course. And I am looking forward to learning more.
I was on Google Sheets yesterday to make a list of all the food carts in Central Oregon, and I gave up, so.
I usually, anytime I encounter data that I know there's a story in or is helping a story I write, we actually are lucky enough to have a data reporter. So I give it to her and I say, please make me a data wrapper, beautiful graph. So that's it. Did you want to share anything?
Well, so I'm a visual storyteller. I'm a photojournalist and a filmmaker who hardly ever uses visuals to talk about data. So if there's a pie chart, there's a blank spot in mine.
Excellent. So it's good range of skill sets. So when I said earlier about like, oh, my background as the director of Agora isn't really related to this, and I lied a little bit, but I think giving a little bit of my origin story might contextualize this. So I've been a journalist for over 30 years, worked at all these places, cut my teeth at Cocoa Times, where I was more of a staff artist back then. And then when I worked at the graphics department in Chicago Tribune, that's where really I saw myself as a visual storyteller and a data visualizer. Then worked at Knight Ridder, did a research study at the Poynter Institute, started teaching at University of Oregon, where I launched a website called Interactive Narratives. Yep, that's right. Sorry. SF State, yes, go Gators. But 2 years away from tenure, the New York Times called and I became the multimedia director for about 8 years at the time, where I led the multimedia team to tell visual stories. But along those lines, I mean, working at the multimedia desk also allowed me to work closely with the graphics department to help sort of visualize complex data, and that's where a lot of my passion comes to as well. So it's a little bit of a blend of both, and now I work at UVO and direct the Agora Journalism Center. And working at Agora, and the last session I pointed to this survey that we'd done with the Latin community, the Latinx community in Salem, and I wanted to use this as a case study to talk about the data that we collected. So what we ended up doing there, and I know Sienna knows a lot about this because we did the very same information needs assessment in Hermiston 1 year, and then 2 years later I ended up doing the one in Salem. Rogue Valley was in between, but as I said in the previous session, we ended up co-designing this survey, and then to better understand how information flows through our community. So I bring this up as the example that I wanted to share. So what we did was we identified the community. We co-designed the survey with nonprofit organizations and community organizations. And then we also met with community members to help facilitate this survey. So one of the things I think I mentioned before, I also clicked through and worked with the Listening Post Collective as their baseline survey. And so let's just open up the survey itself. So this is what we ended up doing with the survey. Again, it was done in Spanish. We have a Spanish version of it as well because, again, we were reaching out to the Spanish community. And then we can alternate between English and Spanish in that way. So some of the more general questions that we asked was like, when something happens that matters to you and your community, where do you hear about it first? So of course, for me to be able to understand some of the baseline data here, I already had to talk to people, right, in the community, because we wanted to basically update. For example, I didn't know about Band and Rewind, which is a platform that parents and students use to communicate with each other, right? So we wanted to add that because we targeted the youth as well when we looked at Salem. So you'll notice that in these in the survey, there's both multiple choice questions as well as open-ended questions. Obviously, the more multiple choice questions that you have, the cleaner the data that you'll get. you won't get the context, you won't get the contextual information that you probably are looking for. That's why you wanted to fill in some of that contextual information, right? So as much as I add those real known sources, I also said, well, which media accounts are you using along those lines, right? So we really wanted to do both multiple choice and open-ended questions. And I'll just scroll through this as you can kind of get a sense of which organizations that they went to. When something happens in your community, which local news outlets did you visit to learn more? And we also want to cap that, right? That they can only pick up to 3. Otherwise, they'll just start selecting what they recognize, as opposed to really being more thoughtful about what they wanted to, how they wanted to respond. Catherine.
Why did you choose to do checkboxes instead of radio buttons and have like one, box of radio button, another for like 1, 2, 3?
You mean as opposed to just doing that?
Yeah. Like why not isolate it more so that they can only choose one, and then a second box with the same choices?
Gotcha. Sort of like ranked choice voting. That's a different approach for sure. I don't know what I would have done with that data, but I guess, yeah, that's deeper data that you can figure out in terms of the people's second choice. But now it is more of an aggregate of what all the collective responses are, right? So click that, various questions, yeah. And then, of course, once you're in there, you can, of course, start looking at the data from Google Forms directly, right? So anybody familiar with Google Forms knows that, you can easily go to the responses and start observing, and you can even start using some of this data. Some of this data is pretty junky, right? It's not really, like suddenly these fall apart, so that's a lot of cleanup that you have to do, which is fine. That's part of the whole thing about data and visualization. There's a lot of data cleanup. So if you're not expecting to clean up data, expect to clean up data, because if you have bad data, then the whole study goes kaput. But there are real baseline information that you can use directly from Google Forms, right? So for example, like a lot of the biographical information, like age, is all pretty straightforward. Zip codes, we also asked that. I would probably visualize this in a map, obviously. And then other information such as home status, which was pretty relevant for us, as well as employment. So all of those pie charts, you can actually just copy and paste directly into whatever you want to use, right? So again, you can do a lot with both Excel and Google spreadsheets, as some people already know. So that is what we're looking at there. And then, yeah, so Google Forms, it's useful for data collection and also collaboration, obviously, is really helpful as well. I think alternatives that I've also listed down here that, again, is accessible to the QR code is SurveyMonkey. Typeform is another one that a lot of people use, as well as Qualtrics. So University of Oregon actually is committed to Qualtrics, and they keep slapping my hand saying you should use Qualtrics instead of Google Forms. But I just love Google Forms. So convenient. Right? Yeah.
I can ask you this exact context because, to your point, as I was listening to this, I've run into it quite often where Google Forms is the easy answer. A product like Typeform does much of the work for you, but you have to front load it in terms of pick your top 3. You put 100 entries in there and then say, only let them pick 3.
Yeah.
Do you find that asking and the simplicity of Google Forms versus the amount of advanced work that is done with these other products like SurveyMonkey, Typeform, and Qualtrics, you find that it's easier to let people just throw the data and then sort it out at the end?
I mean, to me, I'm drawn to Google Forms because for me, it's a complete 360 service, right? It's both the form as well as it creates the spreadsheet. You just have, everything is more collaborative, and that's why I'm continually drawn to it. I have to admit, I'm forced to use Qualtrics every once in a while, and I just feel like the interface is it's no more complex than it really needs to be. That's, again, why I choose that. Typeform, I've seen other people use it. I think it's great. Another one I would add, it's mostly more of a Excel on steroids, would be Airtable, but they also have a front-end interface for Airtable as well, and I'll mention that in a little bit. But yeah, so all of this, you can kind of, again, get the baseline graphic through Google Forms. And again, pies and vertical bars are really helpful, and then you can copy and paste directly into the Google Form too, wherever you want to publish, right? So because of the Google Forms, then it generates this complex sheets, right? So again, this is all the data that's coming directly from the form that we had in Salem for the community. I think we had over 280 responses from that survey, so obviously there's some complexities. And as I mentioned before, some alternatives to Google Sheets would be Microsoft Excel, or even Airtable would be another approach to looking at this. All right, so here's the fun begin. And I'll start sitting down because I don't know actually how to hold this phone or hold this mic while I'm trying to navigate this. Because for those looking for how to make more use of your Google Sheets, this is some of the approaches to that, right? So for folks who dabbled with Google Sheets, obviously there's the magic to Google Sheets are the functions, being able to program cells so that it gives you the formulas based on those cells, right? So if you look at the Google Sheet function list, there's obviously the baseline is like sum, right? You can just add as many items as possible. So there's sums, and then there's averages. Obviously, you can do the average of a collection of data. You can kind of narrow it down there and all that, right? So that's all the sort of the basic functions. So, you know, again, from folks who may not be that familiar, you know, you can easily generate formulas by just highlighting the number of cells and then just adding the sum right here. So then now that's the sum of those numbers above, right? And if you wanted to do not sum, but you wanted to do average, then obviously I get an NA. No, I'm kidding. And you can, you know, again, you don't even have to type all this, right? You can just highlight it that way and just cut it. So real basic functions that's out the box, easy to do using Sheets. Now, one of, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to clean up your data, because you'll start looking at, like, for example, so this is my whole sheet from our Salem survey. And you'll notice that in my very first tab, I just say it's raw, don't modify. Don't change it. Make sure that you always have a copy of your original file so that you have a source to come from, right? If you start modifying your original data, then you run the risk of losing something critical. So always keep an unmodified version of your data set, and then simply make a copy of that tab, and you start working off of it. So now I have a tab here called data sheet, and this is all of my cleaned up data based on that, right? So tabs is your friend, make sure you're doing that. So one of the other things that I love about more of the complex tools that's out there, like Tableau is something that I've used in the past, is because they can do these things called a pivot table. And a pivot table is when you're looking at multiple columns or multiple data sets and start relating to them, right? So there's no real easy way to do that, to cross over, but there's functions that you can write to make sure you're pulling the data of what you want to sort of carve out. And we'll do some examples of that. So, again, pivot tables is a way to summarize large data sets by grouping and aggregating data based on the categories. And that's the importance of the functions that we had. So here's some functions that I feel like is super helpful for executing the pivot tables. So it's really the count, right? So the count ifs is a very helpful function that, again, it's highlighted here, and it's basically trying to count the number of instances an item occurs within a column. So what I wanted to do, for example, is yeah, so this is the count ifs off of Google. And then oh yeah, no. Where's my baseline? So the basic function, we did that. And then for count and pivot, so say I have a set of data that you see here, and I wanted to get a sense of how many times TikTok or Instagram is mentioned in that column, right? And I can't just say Instagram or TikTok directly from that column because there's multiple values within that column. So you actually have to do a count ifs to be able to count those number of instances within that area. So I'm gonna go and say, so if it's counting the number of items here, it's gonna go 0, right? Because we really wanna add a value here. So if I say count A to 10, A1 to A10, sorry, I don't know how to, here we go. I'll try to do this. If I wanted, no, it's all good. I don't want it to be my mic stand.
It's the most useful thing I've done all day.
I want to start calling him Mike. Or is it stand? All right, so if I wanted to count how many times TikTok is mentioned in this column, it still gets the 0, mainly because it's looking for how many times TikTok is by itself in that column. So you want to add a variable to sort of say, all right, anything in front or anything in back of the word TikTok, there we go, ifs. Then you start seeing the count 5, right? Was that?
I was saying the point where you did it like 3 times, you still got, that's the point that I always give up.
No, but and then it's always the function, right? It's like, oh, do I have the right function? So the whole idea is that I needed to have count ifs as a part of that function, and then the range, A1 to A10, to be able to count what I'm looking at in terms of the cells, and then the word count. So without any asterisks here, it would not work, right? So that now we know we have TikTok that's built in, that's mentioned 5 times in that column. Now with pivot tables, right, trying to compare data across 2 columns, what if we wanted to say, how many times did the under 18 crowd mention TikTok? Because that's more helpful data, right? To compare it between TikTok of the youth versus the TikTok of the older generation. So let's figure that out. So if I would just, I want to copy this and just say, all right, that's going to be the same thing. It's going to, you'll notice that that's copied across. But this time, I want to put a parameter to what I'm searching for to sort of say, all right, now I want to look for TikTok in A1, but in columns B1 to B10, and then I want it to be under 18. Now we'll notice that there's 2 of the 5 that has TikTok, but only if they're under 18 on the other side. So now you have that real good data, right? That's the count. And you're like, oh, but what about the over 18 or the not under 18? And now you can just do a greater plus sign like this. Oh, what is that one? Huh. DJQQ under 18. Why is that not working? Right?
You've got a bad mic stand.
There must have been that. Huh. Count F, speed 10. Tick-tock, comma. This is what you always have to do. Look at your code. Let's see if it works. That should work. Oh. Heh. Ah, it's that darn asterisk. No. What is it? Count F. Should be, it's one or the other, so that's what's helpful. Is there another asterisk? Nope. All right, I'll figure this out. But I also don't want to waste your time as I try to figure it out. So I went ahead, so you guys get that basic idea, right? In terms of this, count ifs. So now I did this for the where first. So you'll notice that now in the question that I have in terms of when something happens that matters to you in your community, where do you hear about it first? This time I ended up looking at that where first column and just indicated all of the instances I put in terms of the sources. And I did under 18 column versus 19 and plus, right? Non-under 18. So that now I'm looking at this data separately, but it's a little bit more complex because I wanted to use the data that is continuous. It's not just trimmed down to like responses 1 to 10. You want to be able to capture all of them. So you'll notice that in this formula, the formula is a little bit different in the sense that the count ifs is now calling up data sheet. Data sheet was the tab that I used, right? Uh-oh, now I ruined it. What happened? Is the tab, well, data sheet is the name of the tab that's underneath, right? And then instead of D1 to D10, it's just apostrophe D to D. So it's considering the entire column of D, which you'll notice, which is the column within data sheet. And then I put the asterisk again of how many times Apple was mentioned in that list. And you'll notice that I really don't know how to get back to my full screen here. View, enter actual size. There we go. All right. Sorry, Mike. You're getting tired already. No, you're good. All right. Yeah, so you'll notice that data sheet was the name of it, and then the formula of, so you'll notice I didn't even put Apple News. I'm just assuming that the variable Apple will be sufficient enough to capture how many times Apple News was considered, right? Because I looked at all the other full lists, Apple wasn't necessarily mentioned before, right? So all of that is a way to capture the data sheet that how many times Apple was mentioned for the under 18 crowd. And that's the full formula. And for the, so this is why, oh, I see. That's what happened. I put the, it should be, was it extra?
The quotes is on the other side.
Yeah. Quotes is on the other side of that. Is that what it is? No. just ruined, where first, right here. Yeah, there was an extra quote. Gotcha. So let's just fix it. Where first? No. All right.
Should it be, instead of B1 through B10,
Yeah.
B1 through A10?
It should be.
That should be B1 through B10?
Yep. Yep. Did it work? No.
You're missing an A and with a 10 there,
There we go. All right. Yay, 3-2. Thank God. Yes. Oh my God. So much anxiety. All right. So now that we have the data set, look, basically there's a pivot table, right? This is where you want each of these tabs to be getting there. And this is where you then either copy paste or move this to its own sort of spreadsheet, Google Sheet, and pull that in into Data Wrapper. So let's, now that we've struggled collectively together, thank you for the shared struggle, we'll open it up Data Wrapper from there. So again, the competitors for, or the alternatives for Data Wrapper would be Tableau and Flourish, which other organizations have used. I, some reason, learned how to use Tableau okay. I'm not, it's like Photoshop. You do like tip of the iceberg and you realize there's so much more you can do with Photoshop. Same thing with Tableau. You know a little bit of this and like there's tons of other tools. Same thing with almost every other tool. But Tableau is ultimately too complicated for what we need. It can do the pivot tables naturally, but again, for instances for what we want to do in terms of a news organization, I think Data Wrapper has been a choice for many because it is accessible and it's free, and it's pretty easy. It's super easy to use. Huh?
I was saying free is a big one for me.
Yeah.
Because I think
Yep. Exactly. All right. So let's open up Data Wrapper for folks who've never done Data Wrapper. So again, I'm already logged in. You could also what is an Academy version? What? No, kidding. There you can, obviously I'm just using the free, and notice how in the free you can export a PNG, you can still collaborate with others, and you can create unlimited charts. Whereas once you go to custom or once you get an enterprise, it's basically $600 a month. So
That's a big leap.
it is a big leap. Yeah. But again, you get a lot more customization. And you know, if you're doing it for your organization, I think it's pretty worthwhile if that's what you're punching out all the time, right? So it is pretty worthwhile.
Can we expect that price point might come down as more people become data journalists and start to create like alternatives to Data Wrapper or something, right? Like,
Yeah.
are we forward looking into that? Like, we won't always have to pay an arm and a leg.
I don't know. I can't, it's hard to predict that, I think. You know, I mean, one of the things that is going to change everything is everything I just showed you with the pivot tables. I mean, you can do natural language questions on AI, and it's going to do the same thing, right? Like around the corner. You know what I mean? Like, tell me how many times under 18 people said TikTok. So I don't have to do that formula. It's just going to pop up. So.
Are you worried about like fact checking for that though? That's been my biggest concern
Yeah.
in AI to find answers like that. It's like I want to see the process.
Yeah. I mean, I fact check in a sense that I ask AI to do it, but I still do the formulas. You're like, oh, I got it right. So then my confidence level goes up based on that. But if it's too super gibberish, then yeah, it's all about editing your AIs. That's for sure.
I think we live in a post-fact world.
Who are
I'll go back to holding them up.
All right, so I'm gonna go up here, and then notice that I just need to just copy and paste. I mean, I'm gonna copy this data set, right? All columns, all the cells, and I go back to data wrapper, and I just said, all right, create a new chart. So once it creates a new chart, you'll notice that I can link to a Google Sheet. I can link to a whole different external data, or upload a CVS or a CSV file or an XLL file. I'm just gonna copy and paste it for simplicity, but everything else is, so notice that it's basically tab delimited, right? Straight out of Google. And then it's gonna start recognizing, so I hit proceed. It's got this right. So that's one thing, is that it's like, oh yes, do recognize this as, so notice that the blue columns, which is here, does recognize it as a table successfully. Increase this. Yeah. And then if it's dates, it's green, and if it's just text, it's like that. So that now, I feel like this is good data, right? That's happening. And I can just proceed from there. And from there, boom, data wrapper just visualizes it automatically. But of course, then you start selecting, it's like, I think the stacked bars, because I'm comparing under 18 and 19 plus, they're gonna be natural to be stacked bars, right? Because then now I can compare it from left to right. So from then, you have more customization tools that you're welcome to use, right? So again, now that we feel like, okay, that's a good chart, I can say, all right, I want my type actually right aligned, so it looks better that way. I want the sort to be based on popularity or the most highest value, right? So we can quickly see that in our study. Remember, we were able to connect with a lot of under 18-year-olds because we went to this Willamette Academy, which is, again, whenever we do surveys, who is often left out? The youth, right? It's only the people who have the time to fill out surveys tend to do the survey. So you do a lot more intentionality for doing some outreach. So you'll notice that in the 18 crowd, 18 below crowd, their sources of information is Instagram, TikTok, coworkers, classmates, parents, right? So their personal network, and of course, SMS and texting. So everything else drops fairly quickly around there, right? And then when you want to look at the 19 plus crowd, you'll notice that Facebook group significantly blows up at the bottom there, right? Again, not surprising, but it's, well, regardless if it's high quality data or information, it's still where people gather, right? It's still where people, so the importance of going where people are still stands. But again, this is all customizable at this point. As you can see here, you can do the totals if you wanted to, but that doesn't look great, and so forth. Now you can do it the other way as well, right? So super customizable from there. Then we want to start annotating it, right? So you'll notice that when we did the annotation, we said, oh, I want to be able to capture this text and just put that as the description. And then I want to say, when something happens that matters to you in your community, where do you hear it first? I'm just going to call this chart where first, right? And now it's all built in here. You can also decide the layout, if you want it to be bigger or smaller, depending on where you want to publish it, right? So it's super helpful in that way. And then hit proceed, and now you can either publish it, you can link to it from there, or you can embed that code from there, or you can generate a PNG and then just post it directly on your publishing tools as a PNG file. And that's all. So if I went back to my dashboard, I did also local news outlets. So if we open up that one, I also sorted this out by under 18 to over 18. And you'll notice that in terms of the Oh, because I picked it up on the other one, that's why. I want to go under 18. There we go. Looks prettier. So Statesman Journal, the television stations, and then the radio stations were pretty much high up. Sorry, Les, Salem Reporter wasn't high up. What was really interesting with this data was when we're talking about data quality. Sorry. Thank you. Appreciate it, Thorsten.
Are you going to go back to the keyboard?
Yeah, I might. I just might. No, go ahead.
I'm just going to hang here then.
I always like having you by my side. I'm always honored by that.
Andrew is so important that he needs a body. That's really my
So one thing, in terms of data cleanup, what we ended up doing, we found out that Salem, for the under 18 crowd, this is website, because we had Salem News, it is an existing website, but it looks like it was developed in AOL days. So I just don't think it was legitimate. But I do worry that the data was corrupted in a sense that Salem News was a good brand for the under 18. And they probably said, oh yeah, I'd look at Salem News. Yeah, but yeah, exactly. So that's the kind of data that you want to like flag and just say, hey, maybe this is as accurate as we'd want it to be. So we start like kind of considering that as well. One thing I wanted to do at some point, what time is this over? Soon, right? 2:55 or 2? Huh. Wow, right on. What else do you guys want to do?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
This is peeling back from the technical stuff, which is when do you decide to visualize? We're getting collaboration, yeah. When do you decide to visualize data? Like for me, when I'm putting together stories, often I find that descriptions of data and percentages or whatever get in the way of the flow of a story, and so I want to put it off to the side and visualize it because it seems like a better way to use it. But how do you think about that? Like, when do you use this, and when do you use text? When do you use some other way of?
Well, to me, I would use this kind of tool to be able to highlight a specific set of information. So that's one of the reasons why I like some of the stuff here, that you can actually show highlight elements. So I can say, hey, people, check this out. No matter how much people say newspapers are dead, Statement Journal is still the go-to source in Salem for this community, right? As a single source. Yeah, even under 18. Again, the branding might be a little bit different, but at the same time, what we heard from the responses, the open-ended question responses, was the fact that they talk about it with their family. So they do recognize the name brand of the Salem Journal. But with that said, you'll also notice that if you collectively put all of the TV stations together, that surpasses the Journal, right? So you start thinking, it's like, well, no, television is actually still a go-to organization or a source. And then the other one I would point out in the open-ended field, we also noticed that a lot of the Spanish-speaking respondents here mentioned that they go to the specific Spanish-speaking organizations like La Compañía and Radio Poder, because they're originally Spanish-speaking outlets, and they deliver in outlets. You had a hand up, Catherine?
To your question of like when do you use a tool like this, for me, I find that when I'm starting to have a lot of facts, figures, numbers, a lot of figures in my reporting that might start to either clog up the writing or get a little confusing, then I really want to think about how do we visualize this with graphs or charts. And maybe it's a sidebar, or maybe it takes the place of where like a visual image would be, but give people a spot to slow down and kind of like look over it and synthesize it. So.
We recently, about a year ago, actually started tracking data around like readership and stuff, and like where they come from and all that kind of stuff. And I love getting that data because it also tells me how far down the page they read on something. And I use that a lot when I think about visualization of stuff, because like maybe I have a data point that's really important, but I had to give the background and the data points deeper in the story. I'll visualize it and put it really early, because if there's a really shocking data point, people will read further because they want more info. So it can be helpful for that kind of thing too.
Sorry. No, I was gonna pass the mic.
And the other one I think about too, Torsten, is when you want to customize your display. So by making it interactive, you can highlight and make it easier for people to like, oh, let's say enter my zip code in, and then you can then visualize what your zip code looks like compared to others, right? So that's what I'm drawn to. In fact, I remember there was this one piece that I thought it was getting some traction, is when you load the page, the data actually recognizing that your IP address is based on this data zip code, and it automatically will display it based on that user's zip code. And it's customized based on your user, right? So to me, that's where personalization really goes hand in hand with data.
Recently there was I think the Times did it, and I was looking at another one. I think it was in the Daily Yonder as well, was the fire danger map for the U.S., and you could go into it and put your zip code or a name of a town or something. And I anecdotally know that they get a lot of traction because I get a lot of notes on Instagram and emails saying, did you see that our house, or this place you used to live, so someone's looking at it, maybe just old guys.
What other questions people might have?
I'm curious, just with this information that you were looking at, I guess this isn't a data question, but like, what does it mean to you that everyone's getting their, not everyone, but the majority of people are getting their news from like first Instagram and TikTok? Like I've been thinking a lot about how news is consumed, and I've been really like anti-TikTok, like Daily Yonder getting on TikTok for a while, but now we're on it, and I think that's probably a good thing, because it's just naturally where people are getting their news. But what were your takeaways from all of this data?
Yeah, and it's funny, I remember when we did it for Hermiston, we kind of saw something very similar. We didn't get a lot of the youth there because we didn't target it there. Yeah. But one of the areas that we wanted to highlight that we focused on was there was a popular Facebook group that people go to. So I think along with analyze what my class and I did whenever we do these, we would make a recommendation, like a list of 5 recommendations to both the city of that community as well as the local news organizations. We give them the data, we give them our report, and we make a recommendation. So obviously with the Facebook group is, have you tried, as a news outlet, engage within those Facebook groups, not take over, right? So people don't want that. But is there a way to meaningfully contribute to the conversation in that Facebook group based on the reporting so you can earn the trust of your community? So that's what speaks to me.
I was just saying I have a lot of luck with like putting stuff in Facebook groups. It works really well for stuff that, like stories that I put on Facebook and it doesn't go anywhere, and I'm like, I know people are upset about this. If I put it in the group, people usually do get upset about it and actually click it and read it.
Yeah.
It works really well. But you also have to be willing to use like your personal Facebook for things, which some people don't like to do.
I always create like a journalist Facebook.
I don't use Facebook for myself. It's just like pictures of my dog.
It's like I'm not friends with anyone. It's super basic. It's a headshot, or it provides a little bit of extra information for credibility, but I'll never use the personal stuff.
I don't put
in that
anything
way.
personal on my Facebook.
So as a journalist, you have no friends? Is that the?
in one way that you can see me there, I have no friends.
I have a thought about your question too, and I think one of the, I don't think this is self-serving, but as news is moving onto places like Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, we have to take the visual part of the news more seriously. overlooked in the current news cycle. Think about this election. Think about the one picture that's going to be implemented in your grandchildren. What picture are they going to see? Think, how many of you were alive when Tiananmen Square happened? I was. What's the one picture you remember? And those of you who weren't alive, what do you remember? Do you remember a name? Do you even know where Tiananmen Square is? But you remember that one picture of the guy standing in front of the TV. That is, like, if you want news to stick, it has to be visual. Think about the Vietnam War, which even fewer of us were around for, and if we remember anything, it's the photographs, right? And even though, in the first Gulf War, there was, what was his name from the New York Times? He did this amazing writing out of there. Apple? No. Anyways, I can't remember his name, this writer who did this unbelievable writing about that war, but we remember other pictures. So I think as we go,
Anthony Eddy?
I'll think of it too in the morning. But like, I think it's imperative that our visual report, data visualization, photography, video, which so few people do well, short videos. We'll give you a microphone up there.
I mean, yeah, going back to this, again, the recommendation in terms of Instagram and TikTok is how can, especially the youth, how can we engage the youth and the young people? If they're on that platform, how can we contribute to their fulfilling that information need? Like, what is the technique that they use to be able to consume it? And I don't do TikTok as often as, I mean, I tried it, honestly tried it, and I was like, oh my God, this is not great. So I'm still drawn to Instagram, and I do find like Instagram has some really good informative videos, right? Information rich, and explanatory, right? Videos. And that's the other area that I feel like is relatively untapped are these influencers on YouTube. I mean, there are a lot of go-to sources for that, right? And there's a lot of ex-journalists, especially like Vox, former Vox producers are now influencers on their own YouTube channels. It's amazing. And they actually finding a marketplace for that and followers. So it's an evolving ecosystem for sure. And just trying to keep an eye on it and trying to be ahead of it. And again, this notion of going where people are is so key. Catherine.
I would just like to second what the photojournalist over here in the room just said. Visuals are imperative. In 2020, I think we all learned that if we were sheltering in place, like, what did you do? You looked at your phone, you watched videos, and having quality visuals and investing in photojournalism, like, you can't have it. Try and put your print story on the website without a picture. Just try. I dare you. It won't happen, right? You have to have something there. And so investing in people who understand, like visual journalists, we are also journalists, right? We're not just the photographer. And so we are doing this craft alongside y'all in a really intentional and ethical way. So just plug for visual journalists.
One thing that I always run into in this kind of, like, I love the idea of having like really amazing visuals all the time and being able to put time into getting into data and actually understanding it. There are 2 reporters for Jefferson County. I'm the only one that works full time. I make a 16-page paper by myself every week. I don't have time to go wait for the right lighting to get a good picture or take a good video. I don't take any videos because I don't have time. And so I imagine other, especially in rural contexts, have the same issue. And I don't know, I'm just kind of curious how people have dealt with that. Because like and my coworker, who I love dearly, is not a trained journalist and cannot go out and like take stunning photography and videos and stuff. It's not happening. So I'm dealing with that in the same regard.
Real resource challenge.
I have tried. Yeah.
Call your friends at U of O.
You got anybody that wants to come live in Madras? That's the other part. No one wants to come live in Madras. So.
there's colors in this name. It's like Indigo Collective, but I think there needs to be more organizations like that too, because it can't just be one newsroom that is like there's just not budgets for.
I don't have a budget.
That's why we gotta
So,
collaborate.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do that a lot for like breaking stuff, because realistically with breaking things, if it's just me, I can't be at every single thing that happens. Just, I like to do things with my life sometimes. But otherwise, you also have to like pay freelancers to, even when we like use their pictures, it's kind of been known in the community that we pay people for your pictures if you're like a professional level photographer. And so I don't get to do that very often at all.
I'll bet you breaking news is where you need the least amount of.
Yeah, it really is. Because breaking stuff, I go.
These things are everywhere. I think it's liberated photojournalism for having every day.
Yeah, I love not going to every single one anymore.
What's the outfit that Brian Storm's wife?
Catalyst. No, Catalyst.
Catchlight. That's what I was thinking about. Catchlight is an organization. They collaborate across other institutions, and they really kind of bring in the visual storytelling and actually help support financially ways to make that happen. So something to look into. I mean, there are other outfits and other ways to collaborate. And I think that's the key area, right? How do we collaborate across, our local networks or even wider networks? As Jody from Forge has really been pushing on, is the civic hubs, right? Is how do we support each other and think more collaboratively rather than competitively to really uplift all of our work together, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the other suggestions. I've done a fair amount of stuff with Underscore, which is a specific Indigenous news outlet, because that's a lot of Jefferson County's community, and they're great for collaborative stuff. But I always am looking for more stuff because I can't do it by myself. We cannot legally have student interns. I have looked into it because you have to either pay them or give them college credit. And we do not have a college close enough that will give them credit. Please.
Someone has to pay them, but you don't necessarily. Yeah. That's the secret.
Just check it. I was just checking in to see how it was going. Yeah, it was a good conversation. I mean, one thing I wanted to test out was the map in Data Wrapper. So I took a look at the map based on zip code. So I haven't tried this, so I can totally fall my face. But so I come up there again. Map. So I'm going to say 97302, I think had 16. So of course I would have written the script to make this happen, but since we're already here, we'll just have fun with it. Okay, so these are the 4 data points that I wanted to give it a shot. And then let's go back to create a map. I think I want to do a symbol map. No. Okay. falling flat in my face. I'm gonna say.
To be fair, I asked him to do data wrapper and he'd never done it before, so he went research data.
Thank you, ChatGPT. Yeah, because I think I mentioned before I used Tableau to do all the visualization for the Salem project. And then I looked at Data Wrapper right after that. I'm like, shit, I should have used Data Wrapper. So much easier. But it's pretty powerful. But now I'm looking at maps and it's not as simple as I thought it was going to be. Create a symbol. Anyway, I don't want to, we're just trying to figure this out. Yeah, no, those are bigger. I mean, but they used to have tools that was really more user-friendly with ArcGIS. So, but yeah, I think that's somewhat overkill for most instances. Just like Tableau. Tableau's, also they shifted from like sort of real content rich to more about like, how do you understand your market? They, you know what I mean? Tableau became more of a B2B play rather than a C2C. So, yeah, I don't want to waste people's time trying to figure out what the map looks like. I should have tested that before the session. But all right, any other questions to?
I have a question. I'll always have questions. When do you move from focusing on Excel and Google Sheets into something like a little bit more higher powered? Like at what point are you thinking like, okay, I've kind of like hit the ceiling on what this program can provide for me, and then like when do you start to think bigger?
I think if I'm really looking at like thousands of data points, then I would probably go switch over to Tableau. And you really wanted to sort of break that down, then there's more powerful pivot table tools in Tableau. And you can start really sorting things out. And you're actually working on the data, and it's live data. And that's pretty key, right? If you're constantly updating your COVID impacts and it's updated daily, you don't want to keep exporting your data to get read by Data Wrapper. You want it to be fed by a data itself, and then it gets updated. But what you can, the complexity of Data Wrapper allows you to do that though. So, you know, if we take a look at, where's my dashboard? Yeah, so if I wanted to, again, create a chart, right, I could say link to an external data. So that link to the external data could be your, you know, like either your outputted CSS file, your outputted JSON file directly from your database. That then you have a script that updates it every 10 minutes. At least you have a live JSON, you know. So that would be a useful way of making that happen.
Where do you get your data? I feel like there's so many places you could probably look for data or that have databases. Where's like, besides like a survey that you're looking for specific information, like where do you go and search for something relevant or interesting when you're just kind of combing?
I mean, all of it's out there, right?
Yeah,
I mean, in some ways, so it's really
like
about hiring.
overwhelming, I feel like.
Yeah.
Where are some like go-to sources that you kind of look at, I guess?
To me, I think it's really about, I mean, at that point when I wanted to do that, then that's when I hired someone else, way smarter than me, and because they know how to scrape the data from external sources. So then they would then write a script to scrape that data, you know, from known sources, known available sources out there. I know that totally dodged your question, but.
You can request from governments as well. You can ask for their CSV files. Those are public records usually. Yeah. So, and then sometimes, like now, a lot more municipalities are having their CSV files directly downloadable from parts of their websites. They can be really huge, but you can get those.
I also find that librarians, if you
So again, with this QR code, you can click on it. It has all the links to the other resources that I mentioned. Email me anytime if you want to work on a project or have some ideas or a question. And I have one more ask is, and I mentioned this in the lunch session, but so we at Agora, we did an ecosystem report back in 2022, where then we took a snapshot of the local news and information ecosystem across the state. And we actually have a database of, the map doesn't work right now, but it is a database of all of the news organizations in Oregon. So this is a snapshot from early 2022. We haven't updated the data, but we're gonna update it this summer to a 2024 report. But we need help. We would love to get folks, maybe, so if you could fill out the QR code, or I also have flyers here if you want to pass them around. And then it's just asking a few questions about, like, what we want to know is, like, how many full-time staffers do you have within the news organization, right? And because we want to really get a good landscape scan of what's happening so that collectively we can find solutions together, right? Because if we keep competing against each other, and because of our limited resource, I think collectively is the only way that we can survive. So the more we can, so we're trying to do this survey and the study so that we can get a sense of the snapshot, what does it look like, and what are some ideas that you might have to actually support your community's information needs, whether it's deeper engagement, whether it's collaboration, whether it's solutions-oriented journalism that we really want to also reframe. I'd love to try to work with you all to make that happen. So anyway, there's a survey up there if you want to fill it out.
When will that study be available after collecting the data?
We're hoping to stop all the data by the end of September, and then have it ready by end of October or November. Because we have a framework already, and I'm also working with the developer right now to make the map a little bit more interactive and more helpful. Because right now it's...
Where would we find it?
It'll be on Agora's website, yeah. And the other reason why we're doing that too is because, again, resource and funding is a obvious challenge. There are two initiatives that have purview view, and I've been working closely with Jody in the last year or so from Forge. There's the Press Forward opportunity. I'm sure many people already have applied. There's the next round of open call is going to happen this fall, and it is really going to support both newsrooms and support organizations as well, like Agora's. So I would love, we've been also trying to push for a Press Forward local chapter. And wouldn't that be great if we had a pool of funds specifically just for Oregon, if we can get Oregon Community Foundation onto play. They're the 800-pound gorilla that should be played. Cool. Excellent. All right. Thank you all. Hope that was fun and interactive.